I quit my job as a lighthouse keeper 3 weeks ago. I am still shaking as I write this. The Coast Guard found me unconscious on the rocks below Beacon Point Light. I was hypothermic and babbling about ships that do not exist. They said I had been missing for 6 days, but I swear I was only down there for a few hours. The doctors think I had a psychotic break from isolation, but I know what I saw. I know what spoke to me in the dark. I need to tell someone what really happened out there. Maybe if I get it all down, the voices will finally stop calling my name. Here is my story. The job posting appeared on my laptop screen at 3:47 in the morning, on a Tuesday in October. I had been awake for 36 hours straight, staring at spreadsheets and drowning in the kind of existential dread that only comes from processing other people's taxes for 15 years. The maritime employment site was just another rabbit hole in my sleepless internet wandering. The ad read, "Lighthouse keeper needed. Remote location. 6-month contract. $4,000 per month plus housing. Minimal human contact required." I applied before I could talk myself out of it. My name is David Carver. I used to be the kind of person who planned everything 6 months in advance. I had color-coded calendars, backup plans for my backup plans, a savings account that could weather any storm. That version of me died 3 years ago. It happened in a hospital waiting room, holding my daughter's cold hand while machines beeped their final songs. Sarah was 22 when she called me that night. She was drunk, scared, and stranded at some college party in the woods outside Portland. She needed her dad to come get her, but I was neck-deep in April tax season. My desk was buried under client files and looming deadlines. "Can't you just call an Uber?" I had said, not even looking up from my computer screen. "I am really swamped here, sweetheart." "Dad, please. Something is wrong with these people. I am scared." But I was tired, stressed, and drowning in work. "You are 22, Sarah. Figure it out. We will talk in the morning." She figured it out all right. She tried to drive herself home on dark country roads, drunk and terrified. The oak tree she hit was more than 200 years old. The impact was so violent that the investigating officer said she probably never felt it. I found out at 6:15 in the morning when my phone rang. By the time I reached the hospital, she had been dead for 4 hours. The guilt ate me alive for 3 years. I went through the motions. Grief counseling, antidepressants, awkward conversations with well-meaning friends who did not know what to say. But nothing touched the core of it. The knowledge that my daughter had died alone and afraid, because her father was too busy to answer her call for help. So when the lighthouse job came up, I jumped at it. Remote location, minimal human contact, 6 months to disappear from the world and maybe find some peace, or at least stop dreaming about Sarah's voice calling my name. The interview was conducted over video chat with a man named Captain Morrison, weathered and gruff, with the look of someone who'd spent decades fighting the ocean. He asked basic questions about my experience with mechanical systems, my comfort with isolation, my ability to handle emergencies. "It's not an easy job," he warned. "Beacon Point is 12 miles off the main coast. No cell service, no internet, except for emergency communications. The supply boat comes once a month, weather permitting. You'll be completely alone out there." "That's exactly what I need," I told him. Morrison studied me through the pixelated video connection. The last keeper quit after 3 months, said the isolation got to him, made him hear things that weren't there. "I'm not afraid of being alone." "It's not the being alone that gets to people," Morrison said. "It's what the alone brings with it." I didn't understand what he meant until it was too late. The supply boat Mercy picked me up from Bar Harbor on a gray October morning. Captain Rodriguez was a compact man, with calloused hands and worried eyes. He spent the 2-hour journey to Beacon Point telling me about the lighthouse's history, though I got the sense he was really trying to talk me out of staying. Built in 1847, he said over the rumble of the engine. Used to be manned by a crew of 3, but they automated most of the systems in the 80s. Only need one keeper now to maintain the equipment and watch for problems. What kind of problems? Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The reef around Beacon Point has claimed 17 ships over the years, mostly in the old days, before modern navigation, but, he shrugged. Ocean's got a memory, you know. Sometimes the past doesn't stay buried. I thought he was being dramatic. Sailors love their ghost stories. Beacon Point light rose from the gray water, like something from a maritime postcard. A classic white tower, maybe 70 feet tall, connected to a small keeper's house by a covered walkway. The whole structure sat on a rocky outcrop barely large enough to contain it, surrounded by jagged reefs that showed their teeth at low tide. Rodriguez helped me unload my supplies, 6 months' worth of canned goods, frozen meals, books, and personal items. The dock was weathered and narrow, barely wide enough for 2 people to walk side by side.
Radio check is every morning at 0800, he said, handing me a waterproof case containing emergency equipment. Coast Guard monitors Channel 16. If you don't check in, they'll assume something's wrong and send a boat. What about emergencies? Emergency beacon in the case. Press the button and they'll come running. But David, he grabbed my arm as I turned toward the lighthouse. The isolation out here isn't like anything you've experienced. It gets inside your head, makes you see things, hear things. The previous keeper, Marcus Webb, he was a good man, 20 years experience. But something happened to him out here. What kind of something? Started calling in strange reports, ships that didn't show up on radar, voices in the fog, lights under the water. Coast Guard thought he was drinking, but Webb was sober as a judge. Then one day, he just stopped checking in. When they came to investigate, they found the lighthouse empty. All his belongings were still there, but Webb was gone. Never found a body. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the October wind. What do you think happened to him? Rodriguez looked out at the water, where fog was beginning to gather on the horizon. I think the ocean took him. Same as it takes everyone who stays out here too long. He was back in his boat and heading for shore before I could ask what he meant. The lighthouse felt abandoned, even though it had been cleaned and prepared for my arrival. The keeper's quarters were small but comfortable. A living room with a stone fireplace, a compact kitchen, a bedroom with a single bed and a view of the endless ocean. Personal touches from previous keepers remained. A coffee mug with a faded Coast Guard logo, paperback novels with cracked spines, a chess set with pieces worn smooth by countless games against solitude. The lighthouse itself was a marvel of engineering. The lamp room at the top housed a massive Fresnel lens that focused the light into a beam visible for 20 miles. The rotation mechanism was automated, controlled by a computer system that had been upgraded in the 90s. My job was to monitor the equipment, perform routine maintenance, and report any problems to the Coast Guard. It should have been simple. The first 3 days passed without incident. I established a routine: morning radio check, equipment inspection, weather observations, reading, early bedtime. The isolation was actually peaceful after years of city noise and constant stress. I could feel my body relaxing, my mind clearing. But on the 4th night, I woke to find the lighthouse beam had stopped rotating. I checked my watch. 2:17 a.m. The light was still on, but the lens had stopped moving. The beam frozen, pointing northeast toward the open ocean. I climbed the spiral stairs to the lamp room.
my bare feet cold against the metal steps. The rotation motor was humming normally. The computer showed no error codes. I pressed the manual override button and the lens began turning again, the beam sweeping across the water as it should. But in the few seconds before the light resumed its rotation, I saw something that made my blood freeze. A ship sat motionless in the beam's path, maybe a quarter-mile from the reef. It was old, ancient even, with tall masts and tattered sails that hung limp despite the strong wind. The vessel looked wrong somehow, like it was made of shadows and memory rather than wood and rope. The beam completed its rotation and swept back toward the ship. Nothing there, just empty water and rolling waves. I stood in the lamp room until dawn, watching the beam paint circles on the ocean. The ship didn't reappear, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, just beyond the light's reach, waiting. The next morning's radio check went normally. I reported the equipment malfunction and repair, mentioned the weather conditions, kept my voice steady and professional. But I didn't mention the ship. What would I say? That I'd seen a ghost vessel that disappeared when the light hit it? They'd think I was losing my mind. Maybe I was. The ship came back the next night, and this time, it wasn't alone. I was in the lamp room, pretending to read, but really watching the water, when the beam illuminated them. 3 vessels this time, arranged in a rough line parallel to the reef. The same impossible ships with their tattered sails and shadow-black hulls. But now I could see figures on their decks. They stood perfectly still, facing the lighthouse. Even through binoculars, I couldn't make out their features. They were too far away, and the light played tricks with depth and shadow. But their posture was unmistakable. They were watching me. The beam swept past, and they vanished. When it came back around, empty water. I tried the radio, cycling through every channel. Static on some, silence on others. The Coast Guard frequency was dead. Not even the usual background chatter from passing ships. Coast Guard Station Portland, this is Beacon Point Light, do you copy? Nothing. Any station, this is Beacon Point Light, requesting radio check. Silence. I was completely cut off. That's when I heard the first voice. It came from below, drifting up from the rocks around the lighthouse's foundation. Soft, almost lost in the wind, but definitely human. David? I pressed my face against the lamp room window, peering down at the jagged stones below. The lighthouse beam swept across the rocks with each rotation, but I saw nothing moving down there. David, can you hear us? Plural now. Multiple voices, speaking in unison. My hands shook as I grabbed the emergency radio, the one that was supposed to work even when everything else failed. Static filled the speaker, punctuated by bursts of what sounded like voices speaking in languages I didn't recognize. David, come down to us. The voices were clearer now, more insistent. They seemed to be coming from the water itself, as if the ocean was calling my name. I should have pressed the emergency beacon, should have called for immediate evacuation, but something held me back. A mixture of curiosity and dread that kept me frozen in place. Who are you? I called down to the rocks. The voices stopped. Complete silence except for the wind and waves and the mechanical hum of the lighthouse equipment. Then, soft as a whisper, "We've been waiting for you, David. We've been waiting so long." I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the lamp room, watching the beam sweep across the water, waiting for the ships to reappear. They didn't, but the voices continued until dawn, calling my name, begging me to come down and join them. When the sun rose, the voices faded. But they'd left something behind. A certainty that I wasn't alone on Beacon Point, and that whatever was sharing the lighthouse with me had been waiting for my arrival. The next few days followed a pattern that quickly became routine. During daylight hours, everything was normal. I maintained the equipment, tried unsuccessfully to raise the Coast Guard on the radio, rationed my supplies. The lighthouse felt like what it was supposed to be, a remote but functional maritime facility. But when the sun set, the other world woke up. The ghost ships appeared every night now, their numbers growing. 5 vessels the third night, then 7, then a dozen. They formed a rough semicircle around the lighthouse, just beyond the reef line, their spectral crews standing at attention on the decks. And every night, the voices called to me from the rocks below. "David, we know you're there. We know you're listening. Come down to us, David. We have so much to show you. You don't belong up there with the light. You belong down here with us." I began to recognize individual voices in the chorus. An older woman with a southern accent, a young man who sounded like he was crying, a child who spoke in whispers. They all knew my name, and they all wanted me to abandon my post and join them in the darkness below. I started keeping a detailed log of the encounters, partly for my own sanity, and partly as evidence for whoever found my body. If things went wrong, the entries grew longer and more desperate as the nights wore on. Day 8, 13 ships visible in the beam. Voices called for 3 hours straight. Tried emergency beacon.
No response. Either the signal isn't getting through, or no one's coming. Day 10. The ships are getting closer. Last night, the nearest vessel was maybe 50 yards from the reef. I could see the figures on deck more clearly. They're wearing old-fashioned clothes, like sailors from a century ago. Their faces are wrong, pale, hollow, like they've been underwater for too long. Day 12, one of the voices called me by name and mentioned Sarah. How do they know about Sarah? We know about your daughter, David. We know what you did to her. Come down, and we'll help you forget. That last entry shook me to my core. Sarah was 3 years dead, and I'd never spoken about her to anyone connected with this job. How could the voices know? Unless they were coming from inside my own mind. The thought terrified me more than any ghost ship. Was I having a complete psychological breakdown? Was the isolation driving me insane? The rational part of my brain said yes, that I was experiencing elaborate hallucinations, brought on by guilt and solitude. But the ships looked so real. The voices were so clear. And deep down, I knew something was genuinely wrong with Beacon Point Light. I decided to test my sanity by breaking routine. Instead of staying in the lamp room all night, I would go down to the rocks and see what was really there. If the voices were hallucinations, I'd find empty stone and crashing waves. If they were real, well, at least I'd know for sure. I made my descent at 11:30 p.m. on the 13th night. The path from the lighthouse to the water was treacherous under the best circumstances. A narrow trail carved into the rock face, with no railings, and a 50-foot drop to jagged stones below. At night, with only a flashlight to guide me, it was nearly suicidal. But the voices were calling, and I had to know. David, yes, come down to us. We've waited so long. The beam swept overhead every 30 seconds, bathing the rocks in brilliant white light before moving on. In those moments of illumination, I could see the path clearly. In the darkness between, I felt my way along the stone wall, one careful step at a time. Halfway down,
I saw them. They stood on the rocks below, exactly where the voices had been coming from. Dozens of figures in waterlogged clothes, their faces turned up toward me. The lighthouse beam swept across them, and they were solid, real, casting shadows on the wet stone. But when the light moved on, they didn't disappear. They remained visible in the darkness, glowing with a faint phosphorescence like deep-sea creatures.
"David," they called in unison. "Join us." I should have turned back. Every instinct screamed at me to climb back up to the safety of the lighthouse. But I was transfixed by what I was seeing. These weren't hallucinations or manifestations of guilt. They were something else entirely, something that existed in the space between the living world and whatever comes after. I continued down. The figures parted as I reached the bottom of the path, forming a circle around a flat section of rock where the waves lapped gently at the stone. Up close, I could see them clearly for the first time. They were people, had been people, but wrong in fundamental ways. Their skin was pale and translucent, showing dark veins underneath. Their eyes were black as deep water, reflecting light like a nocturnal animal's. Their clothes were from different eras: Victorian dresses, 1940s naval uniforms, modern jeans and t-shirts, all soaked through and stained with seawater. But the most disturbing thing was how familiar they felt. I couldn't place specific faces, but there was something in their expressions, longing, regret, desperate hope, that resonated with emotions I knew intimately. An elderly woman in a tattered yellow dress stepped forward. When she spoke, her voice was the southern accent I'd been hearing from above. "David, honey, we've been calling to you for so long. We knew you'd come eventually. We knew you'd understand." "Understand what?" My voice came out as a croak. "What it's like to carry the weight of the dead," said a young man in a Coast Guard uniform. "What it's like to know that someone died because of your choices. We're all here for the same reason," added a woman in modern clothes, her face blue pale and bloated. "We all failed someone when they needed us most. We all have blood on our hands." The circle tightened around me. More voices joined the chorus, each one sharing a story of failure, of lives lost through negligence or cowardice or simple bad timing. A doctor who'd been drunk during an emergency surgery, a mother who'd left her child alone in the bathtub, a husband who'd ignored his wife's complaints of chest pain. "The guilt brings us here," the elderly woman explained. "The weight of what we've done draws us to places like this, where the boundary between worlds is thin. We're trapped by our own regret, David, just like you." "I'm not dead," I said, though even as I spoke the words, I wasn't entirely sure they were true. "Not yet," said the young Coast Guard officer. "But you're dying a little more each day, aren't you? The guilt is eating you alive, just like it did to us, just like it did to Marcus Webb." The name hit me like a physical blow. Webb. The previous lighthouse keeper? They parted again, and I saw him standing at the edge of the water. Marcus Webb looked exactly like I'd imagined. Weathered, competent, the kind of man who could handle anything the ocean threw at him. But his eyes held the same hollow desperation as the others. "I lasted 4 months," he said. 4 months of fighting the voices, trying to convince myself I was going crazy. But they were right, David. I belong down here with them, with the ones who understand. "What did you do?" I asked, though part of me already knew. Webb's face crumpled. "My grandson, 8 years old. He was visiting for the weekend and I was supposed to pick him up from soccer practice. But I was watching the game, drinking beer, and I forgot. Just forgot. He tried to walk home alone and got hit by a car crossing the highway."
The circle of the dead nodded in understanding. They all had similar stories, variations on the same theme of guilt and consequence. The ocean called to me, Webb continued. Just like it's calling to you. It promises peace, David. An end to the guilt, the dreams, the constant weight of knowing you failed when it mattered most. I looked around at the assembled spirits, these souls trapped by their own regret, and felt a terrible recognition. They were right. I did belong with them. I was dying inside, had been for 3 years, and the only thing keeping me from joining them was the stubborn beating of my heart. Sarah, I whispered. She's here too, said the woman in modern clothes. Would you like to see her? Before I could answer, the crowd parted one final time, and there she was. Sarah stood at the water's edge, exactly as she'd looked the last time I saw her alive. 22 years old, brown hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing the college sweatshirt I'd bought her for her birthday. But her skin had the same translucent quality as the others, and her eyes held depths that seemed to go on forever. "Hi, Daddy," she said, and her voice was exactly as I remembered it. Warm, loving, with just a trace of the little girl she'd once been. I fell to my knees on the wet rocks. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. I'm so fucking sorry." She walked toward me, her feet making no sound on the stone. "I know, Daddy. I know you're sorry. That's why I'm here. I should have come to get you. I should have dropped everything and come to get you." "Yes," she said simply. "You should have. And because you didn't, I died alone and scared in the dark." The words hit me like physical blows. I'd spent 3 years telling myself that Sarah wouldn't want me to blame myself, that she'd forgive me, that the accident wasn't really my fault. But here she was, telling me the truth I'd always known but been too cowardly to face. "But that's okay, Daddy," Sarah continued, kneeling beside me on the rocks, "because you can make it right now. You can join me down here, and we can be together forever. No more guilt, no more pain, just peace." She reached out to touch my face, and her fingers were cold as deep water. "All you have to do is let go." I looked into her eyes, those familiar brown eyes that had looked at me with such love and trust for 22 years, and saw my own death reflected there. It would be easy. Step into the water, let the waves take me down to wherever these spirits dwelt. No more lonely nights in the lighthouse. No more guilt eating me alive from the inside. Just peace. I was about to stand, about to take Sarah's hand and walk into the ocean, when the lighthouse beam swept across us. For just a moment, everything was illuminated in brilliant white light, and I saw the truth. In the harsh glare of the lighthouse beam, the spirits changed. Their faces became predatory, hungry. Their expressions of understanding and compassion twisted into something else entirely. A desperate need that had nothing to do with forgiveness or peace. They weren't offering absolution. They were feeding on guilt, sustaining themselves on the regret and self-loathing of the living. And Sarah, my beautiful, beloved Sarah, smiled at me with teeth like broken glass. "Don't look at the light, Daddy," she said, her voice now carrying harmonics that hurt to hear. "Look at me, only at me." But I couldn't stop staring at what the light revealed. These weren't the spirits of the guilty dead. They were something else, something that wore the faces of our failures to lure us into the dark. They were parasites, feeding on human misery, growing stronger with each soul they claimed. Marcus Webb wasn't here because he'd been consumed by guilt. He was here because he'd been consumed, period. "You're not Sarah," I said, scrambling backward on the slick rocks. The thing wearing my daughter's face laughed, and the sound was like waves breaking on a graveyard. I'm exactly who you think I am, Daddy. I'm your failure made manifest. I'm the guilt you carry, the love you wasted, the promise you broke. I'm more Sarah than Sarah ever was. The other spirits closed in, their faces shifting between human and something else, something that had never been human at all. They reached for me with fingers that trailed water and seaweed, mouths opening to show throats that went down forever. "Come with us, David," they chorused.
Feed us. Let us feed on your guilt until there's nothing left of you but regret.
I turned and ran. The path up the cliff face had never seemed so steep, so treacherous. Behind me, the spirits gave chase, their voices rising into a howl that competed with the wind. But they couldn't leave the water's edge. Something about the lighthouse beam held them back, kept them bound to the rocks where they'd first appeared. I made it to the lamp room as the sun began to rise. The spirits faded with the growing light, their voices becoming whispers, then silence. But I could still feel them down there, waiting for darkness to return. I'd learned the truth about Beacon Point Light. It wasn't just a lighthouse, it was a prison. The beam didn't just guide ships to safety, it held something back, kept it trapped in the spaces between light and dark, between guilt and absolution. And I was the guard. The next 3 weeks passed in a haze of paranoia and mounting dread. I no longer tried to contact the Coast Guard. I understood now that the radio interference wasn't accidental. The things below didn't want outside help arriving. They wanted me isolated, vulnerable, slowly worn down by guilt and loneliness until I was ready to join them. But I also understood my purpose here. The lighthouse beam was more than just a navigation aid. It was a containment system. As long as the light kept rotating, the spirits were held in check. They could call to me, show themselves, but they couldn't fully manifest in the physical world. Previous keepers had been driven mad by the guilt feeders, eventually abandoning their posts to join the hungry dead below. But I had an advantage they'd lacked. I'd seen the truth. I knew what was really down there, and I'd rather die than feed their endless hunger. So I maintained the light. I kept it burning through fog and storm, through the endless nights when the spirits called my name and showed me visions of Sarah, of all the ways I'd failed her, of all the pain I'd caused through my selfishness and neglect. They were relentless. Every night brought new torments, new attempts to break down my resistance. They showed me memories I'd tried to forget, times when Sarah had needed me, and I'd been too busy, too tired, too wrapped up in my own problems to pay attention. They played her voice calling for help over and over until I thought I'd go insane. But I held on. I kept the light burning. The supply boat was supposed to arrive on November 15th. When it didn't show up, I wasn't surprised. The spirits had been growing stronger, their influence spreading. They didn't want witnesses, didn't want anyone who might interfere with their feeding. I rationed my remaining food, melted snow for drinking water, and settled in for a siege. The spirits sensed my determination and redoubled their efforts. They began appearing during the day, clustering around the base of the lighthouse like a besieging army. Their voices never stopped now, a constant chorus of guilt and blame that followed me everywhere. "You killed her, David. You killed your own daughter. She called for help, and you turned your back. She died alone because of you. Join us. Feed us. It's what you deserve." But the worst part wasn't the guilt they tried to force on me. It was the moments when they showed me genuine memories of Sarah. Her laugh, her smile, the way she used to call me Daddy, even when she was in college. They took my love for her and weaponized it, using my grief as a tool to break me down. By the beginning of December, I was running on fumes. The canned goods were nearly gone, and I'd lost so much weight that my clothes hung loose on my frame. The constant stress was taking its toll. I'd started having heart palpitations, dizzy spells, moments where I'd black out and wake up somewhere else in the lighthouse with no memory of how I'd gotten there. But the light kept burning. Whatever else happened, I wouldn't let it go out. That's when Sarah came to visit me alone. She appeared in the lamp room on a night when the fog was so thick I couldn't see the beam's path beyond the glass. No other spirits, no chorus of the guilty dead, just my daughter, sitting in the chair across from me, like she'd done so many times when she was little. "Hi, Daddy," she said, and her voice was exactly right. Not the harmonics-laden mockery of the thing that had worn her face on the rocks, but Sarah's actual voice, warm and familiar and heartbreakingly real. "You're not her," I said, but even as I spoke, I wasn't sure. "I'm exactly her," Sarah replied. "I'm the Sarah who loved you, who trusted you, who thought you'd always be there when she needed you most." She looked so real, so perfectly like my daughter, that I wanted to cry. But I'd learned to be suspicious of perfect illusions. "What do you want?" "I want you to understand something," Sarah said, leaning forward in her chair. "The others down there, they're not me. They're feeding on your guilt, growing stronger every day. But I'm not with them, Daddy. I never was." "Then where are you?" "I'm here," she said, touching her chest. "In your heart, in your memories, in the love you carry for me. I never left you, Daddy. Even when you thought you'd lost me, tears ran down my cheeks. I failed you. I should have come to get you." "Yes," Sarah said gently. "You should have. And I died because you didn't. But that doesn't mean I hate you. It doesn't mean I'm trapped in some horrible place suffering for your mistakes."
Then why do I feel so guilty?
"Because guilt is love with nowhere to go," Sarah said. "Because you loved me so much that losing me broke something inside you. But Daddy, you can't fix what happened by destroying yourself. You can't honor my memory by feeding the things that want to devour you." I looked at her, really looked, and saw not the hungry predator that had worn her face on the rocks, but the daughter I remembered. The little girl who'd built lighthouses out of Lego blocks, who'd declared that lighthouse keepers were the most important people in the world because they saved others. "The light," I whispered.
Yes,
Sarah said, smiling.
the light. You're not here to be punished, Daddy. You're here to keep others safe, to make sure no one else gets trapped by the things that feed on guilt and regret.
"But I'm dying up here. I'm starving. I'm going crazy. And no one's coming to help."
Someone will come,
Sarah said.
but not yet. The spirits are too strong right now, their influence too widespread. You have to hold on a little longer.
"I don't know if I can." Sarah stood and walked to the window, looking out at the fog-shrouded ocean.
Do you remember what I said when I was 7? About lighthouse keepers being the most important people in the world?
You said they save people.
That's right. And that's what you're doing, Daddy. Every night that you keep the light burning, you're saving people. Ships that pass through these waters, other keepers who might take this job, anyone who might be drawn here by their own guilt and pain.
She turned back to me, and her smile was radiant.
You're not being punished. You're being given a chance to transform your failure into something meaningful, your guilt into purpose, your love for me into protection for others.
"Will I see you again?"
You're seeing me now,
Sarah said.
really seeing me, not the twisted version the spirits show you. I'm proud of you, Daddy. I'm proud of what you're doing here.
She began to fade as the fog started to lift, but before she disappeared entirely, she said one more thing.
The supply boat will come tomorrow, but the choice is yours. Leave with them or stay and keep the light burning. Either way, I love you.
And then she was gone, leaving me alone in the lamp room with the rotating beam and the sound of waves against stone. The Mercy appeared through the fog at 10:30 a.m. on December 3rd. Captain Rodriguez at the helm with 2 Coast Guard officers aboard.
I watched from the lamp room as they tied up at the dock. Saw them examining the weathered planks and rusted railings with professional concern. I could leave, pack my few belongings, climb aboard the boat, and return to the mainland. Find a new job, a new life, try to rebuild some semblance of normalcy. But I thought about what Sarah had said, about purpose and protection and the importance of keeping the light burning. When Rodriguez called up from the dock, I was ready with my answer. "David, thank God you're alive. We've been trying to reach you for weeks. Radio's been dead and the GPS shows your emergency beacon was never activated." I made my way down the path, moving carefully on legs that had grown weak from malnutrition and stress. The Coast Guard officers, Lieutenant Hayes and Petty Officer Chen, looked me over with the kind of professional assessment that military medics learn to do automatically. "Sir, you don't look well," Hayes said. "When's the last time you ate a full meal?" "I'm fine," I lied. "Just been dealing with some equipment issues." Rodriguez wasn't buying it. "David, you look like you've lost 30 pounds. What the hell happened out here?" I could have told them the truth about the spirits and the ships and the things that fed on guilt, but they'd think I was insane, which, given the circumstances, wasn't an unreasonable conclusion. Instead, I said, "I want to extend my contract." The 3 men exchanged glances. Chen spoke first. "Sir, with respect, you need medical attention. You're clearly malnourished, and the isolation appears to have taken a significant psychological toll." "The isolation is fine," I said. "It's exactly what I need, but I'll require more supplies. Enough for another 6 months, maybe longer." Rodriguez shook his head. "David, I can't in good conscience leave you out here. You're not well, and winter's coming. The storms will be worse, supply runs more dangerous. This isn't the time to be playing hermit." "I'm not playing," I said. "I'm working. The light needs a keeper, and I'm the keeper." "The light's automated," Hayes pointed out. "Has been for years. It doesn't need a human keeper for basic operation." "You're wrong," I said, looking back at the lighthouse tower. "It needs me more than you know." I could see them making the decision with their eyes, the silent communication of people who'd worked together in dangerous situations. They thought I'd lost my mind, and maybe they were right, but I also knew something they didn't. As if summoned by my thoughts, the fog began to roll in from the northeast. Thick, unnaturally dense, moving against the wind. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in as many seconds. "We need to go," Rodriguez said, his voice tight with sudden anxiety. "Weather's turning bad." But it was too late. The fog swallowed the Mercy first, then crept up the rocks toward us. In its gray depths, I could see shapes moving, familiar shapes. "Get to the lighthouse," I told them. "Now." "What are you talking about?" Chen demanded. "We're not going anywhere. You're coming with us." The first voice drifted up from the fog, soft and pleading. "David, come back to us. You belong with us." Hayes heard it too. I could see it in his face, the way his hand moved instinctively toward his sidearm. What the hell was that? More voices joined the first, a chorus of guilt and hunger rising from the gray. The 3 men looked around wildly, trying to locate the source of sounds that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "David, who are these people you've brought to us?" "New friends, new guilt to feed on. The soldier has blood on his hands. The sailor let his crew down. The captain lost his ship." Hayes went pale. Chen's breathing became rapid and shallow. Rodriguez stumbled backward, his eyes wide with terror. "How do they know?" Hayes whispered.
How do they know about Kandahar? The cargo ship, Rodriguez said, his voice breaking. Oh God, the cargo ship. I was drunk and I missed the signal, and 12 people died. My brother, Chen added, tears streaming down his face. I was supposed to watch him, supposed to keep him safe, but I was playing video games, and he drowned in the pool. The fog thickened around us, and now I could see them clearly. The spirits, dozens of them, climbing up from the water with their hollow eyes and hungry mouths. At their head was the thing that wore Sarah's face, but I could see through its disguise now. It wasn't my daughter. It was something that had learned to wear guilt like a costume. Run, I told the 3 men. Get to the lighthouse and don't look back. We ran. The path up to the lighthouse had never seemed so long. Behind us, the spirits gave chase, their voices rising into a howl that mixed with the sound of wind and waves. But they couldn't climb far from the water. The lighthouse beam held them back, created a boundary they couldn't cross. We made it to the keeper's quarters as the fog reached the building's foundation. I slammed the door and threw the bolt, though I knew it wouldn't keep out what was really hunting us. What the fuck is happening? Hayes demanded, his military composure cracking. Things that feed on guilt, I said, moving to the window. They're drawn to people who carry the weight of the dead. They promise peace, absolution, but all they really want is to consume you. Through the glass, I could see the spirits surrounding the lighthouse. They pressed against some invisible barrier, unable to get closer to the building itself. The rotating beam above us cast its light across their faces, and they recoiled from its touch, like vampires from holy water. This is insane, Chen said. Hallucinations, mass hysteria, some kind of gas leak, or... His words were cut off, as something slammed against the window. One of the spirits, a woman in a Victorian dress, pressed her face against the glass. Her mouth moved, but no sound penetrated the barrier. Rodriguez fell to his knees. Maria Santos, chief engineer on the Esperanza. She died because I was too drunk to read the weather reports, too proud to turn back when the storm hit. 12 souls lost because of my pride. Sergeant Williams, Hayes whispered, staring at another spirit. Lost half my squad because I called in the wrong coordinates. Friendly fire. The guilt has been eating me alive for 3 years. Tommy, Chen sobbed. My little brother Tommy. I was supposed to be watching him at the family reunion, but I was 17 and thought babysitting was beneath me. Found him floating face down in the pool. The spirits sensed their anguish and pressed closer to the window, their faces becoming more predatory, more desperate. They couldn't enter the lighthouse itself. Something about the structure, the light, the purpose it served, created a sanctuary. But they could wait. They could whisper. They could slowly wear down the will of anyone trapped inside. How long have you been fighting them? Rodriguez asked, his voice hollow. 7 weeks, I said. 7 weeks of voices in the dark, guilt made manifest, the constant weight of knowing I failed when it mattered most. Your daughter, Hayes said. It wasn't a question. Sarah, 22 years old, called me for help, and I was too busy to answer. She died alone and afraid because her father couldn't be bothered to put down his calculator. The spirit wearing Sarah's face appeared at the window, its expression shifting between the predatory hunger I'd learned to recognize and something that almost looked like genuine sorrow. But I learned something, I continued. They're not really the people we failed. They're parasites that feed on guilt, using the faces of our dead to lure us into despair. The real Sarah came to me, told me the truth about what I'm doing here. Which is what? Chen asked. I looked up at the ceiling, where the lighthouse beam continued its eternal rotation. Keeping the light burning. The beacon doesn't just guide ships, it holds these things back, keeps them contained. Every lighthouse keeper who's taken this job has been chosen, drawn here by their own guilt, but given a chance to transform it into something meaningful. What happened to the others?
Most couldn't handle it. They gave in, joined the spirits below. But a few. I pulled out a logbook I'd found hidden in the basement, its pages filled with entries dating back decades. A few understood. They stayed, kept the light burning, protected others from sharing their fate. Rodriguez looked through the logbook, his face growing pale as he read. Jesus, this goes back to 1953. All lighthouse keepers, all carrying some terrible guilt. The ocean calls to us, I said. The guilty, the broken, the ones who failed when it mattered most. But we're not brought here for punishment. We're brought here for purpose. A new voice joined the chorus outside, younger, more recent. Hayes looked up sharply. Private Martinez, he breathed. He's here too. The kid who died because of my coordinates. But he looks different from the others. I followed his gaze. Among the hungry spirits pressed against the windows was a young soldier in desert camouflage. But this one wasn't predatory or desperate. He looked sad, certainly, but there was something else in his expression. Peace, maybe. Understanding. Not all the dead are trapped here, I said. Some are just visiting, checking on us, making sure we understand our purpose. As if summoned by my words, another familiar figure appeared among the spirits. Sarah, the real Sarah, not the parasitic thing that wore her face. She looked exactly as I remembered her, but translucent, ethereal. She caught my eye through the window and smiled. Then she did something extraordinary. She turned to face the hungry spirits, raised her hand, and spoke a single word that somehow penetrated the glass. Enough. The parasitic spirits recoiled as if burned. The false Sarah hissed and dissolved into mist. The others backed away from the windows, their forms becoming less solid, less threatening. The real dead don't want revenge, I said, understanding flooding through me. They want us to live, to find meaning in our guilt, not be consumed by it. The fog began to clear. The spirits faded with it, retreating to whatever dark corners they inhabited during the day. Sarah remained visible for a moment longer, mouthing words I couldn't hear but somehow understood. I'm proud of you, Daddy. Then she was gone, and we were alone in the lighthouse, with the sound of waves and the mechanical hum of the rotating beacon. The three men stayed for 2 more days, partly to recover from their encounter with the supernatural, and partly to try to convince me to leave with them. I spent the time explaining what I'd learned about Beacon Point, about the nature of the entities that lurked here, about the true purpose of the lighthouse. It's not just a navigation aid, I told them as we sat around the kitchen table, sharing the supplies they'd brought. It's a prison, a barrier, a sanctuary. The light keeps them contained, prevents them from spreading to other places, where the guilty might be vulnerable. But why you? Chen asked. Why any of us? There has to be some other way to maintain the barrier. Technology can't do this job, I said. It requires human will, human purpose, human understanding of what guilt really means. The spirits feed on self-loathing and despair, but they're held back by guilt, transformed into protection for others.
Rodriguez looked out at the water, where normal ships passed safely through the shipping lanes.
How many people have you saved by staying here? I don't know. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Every ship that passes safely. Every person who might have been drawn here by their own guilt, but found the beacon already manned. The previous keepers who gave in to the spirits. They're not evil, just overwhelmed. They became part of the problem instead of the solution. And you think you can handle it indefinitely? I considered the question honestly. I don't know. Maybe I'll last another year, maybe 10. But as long as I'm here, the light stays on. As long as the light stays on. They stay contained. Hayes stood and walked to the window. What about backup? What happens if something happens to you? Someone else will be drawn here. Someone carrying guilt that matches the intensity needed to power the barrier. It's been that way for 70 years. That's not a plan, Rodriguez said. That's hope. Sometimes hope is all we have. On the morning of the third day, they prepared to leave. I could see the conflict in their faces, the desire to help warring with the understanding that they had their own lives to return to, their own guilt to carry. I can't force you to stay, Rodriguez said, as they loaded their gear back onto the Mercy. But I can't, in good conscience, leave you here to die alone. I'm not alone, I said, looking back at the lighthouse. I have purpose. For the first time in 3 years, I have a reason to wake up in the morning. What do we tell the Coast Guard? Hayes asked. They'll want a report. Tell them the lighthouse keeper is performing his duties satisfactorily, that the light is operational and the beacon is maintained, which is the truth. Chen shook my hand. What about supplies? You can't survive another 7 weeks on what you have left. Send the regular supply boat when the weather clears. Monthly runs, like always. I'll be here. As they pulled away from the dock, I climbed back up to the lamp room. The mechanism was running smoothly, the beam cutting through the clear morning air. In the distance, I could see ships following the shipping lanes, safely guided by the light. That night, for the first time in weeks, the spirits didn't come. The fog stayed offshore, and the water around the lighthouse remained clear. I sat in the lamp room, reading one of the books left by previous keepers, listening to the hypnotic rotation of the beacon. Around midnight, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Not the heavy boots of living men, but something lighter, more familiar. Sarah appeared in the doorway, translucent but smiling. "You made the right choice, Daddy," she said, settling into the chair across from me. Did I? Sometimes I think I'm just running away from the world, hiding from my failures. "You're facing them," Sarah said. "Every night, every time you keep the light burning instead of giving in to despair. You're taking your guilt and making it into something that protects others. Will you stay with me?" "I can't stay all the time," Sarah said, "but I'll visit. When you need me most. When the weight gets too heavy. I'll be here to remind you why you're doing this. I miss you so much." "I know. But missing me isn't the same as being consumed by guilt over losing me. You're learning the difference." She began to fade as dawn approached. But before she disappeared entirely, she said something that made my heart lighter than it had been in years. "I love you, Daddy. I've always loved you, even when you couldn't save me, especially then." The Coast Guard supply boat comes every month now, bringing fresh provisions and checking on my welfare. Captain Rodriguez has been replaced by a younger man named Captain Foster, who treats the supply runs with professional efficiency and doesn't ask too many questions about why I choose to stay in such an isolated place. The spirits still come on foggy nights, still call my name, still try to lure me down to the rocks. But their power over me has diminished. I know what they are now, and I know what I am. Not a victim of guilt, but a guardian powered by it. Other keepers have come and gone over the months, men and women drawn by their own failures, their own weight of regret. Some last a few weeks before the isolation breaks them. Others make it a month or two before they either flee or succumb to the voices below. But a few understand. A few see what I saw, learn what I learned. They stay for a while, help maintain the light, add their strength to the barrier. Then they move on, taking with them the knowledge that guilt can be transformed into purpose. That failing someone doesn't mean you're doomed to fail everyone. I've been here for 8 months now. My beard has grown long and gray. My hands have been weathered by salt air and mechanical work. I look like every lighthouse keeper in every maritime story, solitary, focused, shaped by wind and waves and endless vigilance. But I'm not the broken man who arrived here in October. I'm someone who's learned to carry the weight of the dead without being crushed by it. Someone who's found meaning in the space between guilt and redemption. Sarah visits me regularly now, usually during the quiet hours before dawn. We talk about the ships we've guided safely through the night, about the people we've protected from the hungry things that lurk in fog and regret. She tells me about the other side, about the peace that comes when love is finally allowed to be stronger than guilt. "You don't have to stay forever, Daddy," she said during her last visit. "When you're ready, when you've learned everything this place has to teach you, you can go back to the world. You can live again." "When will I know I'm ready?" "When the guilt stops driving you and starts serving you. When you can think of me without drowning in regret. When you understand that love and loss are different things, and that carrying the dead doesn't mean being dead yourself." I'm not there yet, but I'm getting closer. The light continues to turn, night after night, a beacon in the darkness. Ships pass safely through the channels, their crews never knowing how close they've come to something that feeds on human misery. The barrier holds, the spirits remain contained. And somewhere in the space between duty and healing, between penance and purpose, I continue to keep watch. Which brings me back to where I started this story. 3 weeks ago, I made a mistake. A moment of weakness, a lapse in judgment that nearly cost me everything. It was during one of the worst storms I'd experienced on Beacon Point. The wind was howling at over 60 knots, waves crashing against the lighthouse foundation, rain hammering the windows like bullets. The beacon was struggling against the weather, its rotation slowing, the light dimming intermittently. I was in the lamp room, manually adjusting the mechanism, when I heard something that made my blood freeze. Sarah's voice. But not the peaceful, loving Sarah who visited me in the quiet hours. This was the Sarah from that terrible night, drunk and terrified and calling for help. "Daddy, please, I'm scared. I need you to come get me." The voice was coming from outside, somehow audible over the storm. I pressed my face against the rain-lashed window and saw her standing on the rocks below, soaked and shivering, her hands reaching up toward the lighthouse. Every rational part of my mind knew it was a trap. The spirits had tried this before, using Sarah's image to lure me down. But this was different. This wasn't the predatory, false Sarah, or even the peaceful spirit who visited me. This was my daughter as she'd been in her final moments, lost and afraid and calling for her father. "Please, Daddy, I'm so cold. I'm so scared. Don't leave me alone again." I was moving before I could stop myself, heading for the stairs, my hand on the door handle. The beacon continued to turn overhead, but I could hear the mechanism struggling. If I left my post now, in the middle of the storm, the light might fail entirely. But Sarah was down there. My daughter was calling for help, and this time, I wouldn't fail her. I made it halfway down the cliff path before I realized the truth. The storm was too loud, the wind too strong. No human voice could carry over such noise, could penetrate the sound of waves crashing against rock. Whatever was calling to me, it wasn't my daughter. But by then, it was too late. The rocks were slick with rain and spray, the path treacherous in the best of conditions. My foot slipped on a patch of seaweed, and I tumbled down the last 20 feet, landing hard on the jagged stones below. The impact knocked me unconscious. When I woke up, I was lying in a pool of frigid seawater, my head bleeding, my left arm bent at an unnatural angle. The storm had passed, but fog had rolled in to take its place, and in that fog, they were waiting. The spirits surrounded me, dozens of them, their faces hungry and triumphant. At their center stood the false Sarah, no longer bothering to maintain her disguise. Her face was a shifting mass of guilt and regret. Her voice, a chorus of every failure I'd ever experienced. "Finally," she said. "Finally, you've come down to us." I tried to stand, but my broken arm wouldn't support my weight. Blood loss was making me dizzy, and the cold water was sapping what little strength I had left. Above me, the lighthouse beam continued to turn, but from down here in the fog, its light seemed distant and ineffectual. "You can't fight anymore," the false Sarah continued. "You're broken, bleeding, dying. Why not make it easy on yourself? Let us take the pain away." The other spirits pressed closer, their faces becoming more detailed, more personal. I saw Mrs. Henderson, the elderly neighbor I'd failed to visit. Tom Rodriguez, whose daughter's godfather invitation I'd declined. A dozen others, faces from my life that I'd forgotten, but that my guilt had preserved in perfect, accusatory detail. "Join us," they whispered in unison. "Feed us, become us." I was dying. I could feel it in the way my vision was tunneling, the way my heartbeat was becoming irregular. The smart thing would be to give in, to let them take me and end the pain. After 8 months of fighting, of maintaining the barrier, of transforming guilt into purpose, I was finally at the end of my strength. But then I heard another voice. Not the false Sarah, not the hungry spirits, but the real Sarah. My daughter. The one who visited me in the lamp room. The one who'd learned to separate love from loss. "Get up, Daddy." I couldn't see her in the fog, but I could feel her presence. Warm, loving, free from the corruption that had twisted her image into something predatory. "The light needs you," she said. "They need you. Get up." With strength I didn't know I possessed, I struggled to my feet. The spirits recoiled as if burned, their forms becoming less solid. The false Sarah hissed like a snake. "You're dying," it said. "You're broken and bleeding and alone. What's the point of fighting?" "The point," I said, looking up at the lighthouse beam cutting through the fog, "is that someone has to." I began climbing, one-handed, bleeding, half-blind with pain and exhaustion. I climbed the treacherous path back to my post. The spirits followed, clawing at me, whispering promises of peace and threats of eternal suffering. But they couldn't physically touch me. Some protection, some barrier that existed between the living and the hungry dead. I made it to the lighthouse as the sun began to rise. The spirits faded with the growing light, but not before the false Sarah spoke one final time. "This isn't over. We'll wait for you. We'll always be waiting." "I know," I said, "but so will I." I managed to radio for medical help before I collapsed. The Coast Guard helicopter found me 12 hours later, unconscious but alive. They airlifted me to the mainland, where doctors treated my injuries, and psychiatrists asked careful questions about hallucinations and isolation psychosis. I told them what I thought they wanted to hear. that the stress of the job had gotten to me, that I'd been having vivid dreams and auditory hallucinations, that I'd fallen during the storm and suffered a head injury that had confused my perceptions of reality. They believed me. Mostly. Or at least, they pretended to believe me. The official report listed my injuries as the result of an accident during severe weather conditions. No mention of spirits or supernatural encounters, or the ongoing battle between guilt and purpose.
But I know the truth.
And now, as I sit in this mainland apartment writing down everything that happened at Beacon Point Light, I can feel them calling to me. Not just the spirits, they're contained, held back by the lighthouse beam that continues to turn even without a keeper present. But something else. A pull, a need, a recognition that my work isn't finished. The Coast Guard has declared the lighthouse temporarily unmanned while they review safety protocols. But I know it won't stay that way for long. Someone else will be drawn to the job, someone carrying guilt heavy enough to power the barrier. They'll answer the posting, take the boat ride out to Beacon Point, and begin their own battle with the things that feed on human regret. Maybe they'll be stronger than I was. Maybe they'll last longer, understand faster, find peace sooner. Or maybe they'll join the hungry spirits below, becoming part of the problem instead of the solution. Either way, I'll be watching. Because that's what lighthouse keepers do. We keep watch, we maintain the light, we stand guard against the darkness that always threatens to overwhelm the world. My name is David Carver, and I was the keeper of Beacon Point Light for 8 months and 3 weeks. I quit my job because I was broken, bleeding, and afraid. But I'm healing now, and when I'm strong enough, I'm going back. Someone has to tend the light. Someone has to keep the guilty dead at bay. Someone has to transform guilt into purpose, failure into protection, love into service. And until someone better comes along, that someone is me. The beacon is calling. I can hear it in my dreams, see it when I close my eyes. Steady, eternal, cutting through fog and storm and the endless night. I'll be back, Sarah. I promise. This time, I'll keep my promise.